Cool. Okay, so we've got the discussion notes doc up already. So I think the kind of rough scope for today as the sort of first discussion we've had with rollbacks is to try and work out like where we want to go with rollbacks, like what might be a suitable scope, and how do we kind of progress things. So feel free to lead this direction wherever we feel like it's going to be useful. So my initial question really was, do we want to focus this entirely on auto deploys, rolling back auto deploys?
Well, we don't really roll back anything else. I mean, we don't roll back anything. So that's the first statement. But auto deploys is easier, and we are in that situation where it may actually make sense to do it, because we deploy multiple times a day, so changes is really small. And I mean, I see no value in. I mean, there's a value, but I mean, just the trade-off between the investment, time investment, and what we get out if we go something like rolling back release.gitlab.com or pre-environment. I mean, we're just, for sure there will be post-deployment migrations or things like that when you go from one miner to another miner. So there's just it's impossible to roll back.
Cool.
And yeah, and actually why I think we need to do this is just to have for mitigating an incident. So that's the reason why we want to roll back, because that's the main point, right? So when we have an outage and is deployment related, the first thing is always, can we roll back? And the answer usually is, well, we have no idea, so let's go and try to roll forward, understanding where is the merge request that broke it. While we may aim to have a situation where we say, yes, we can, because we know, and then we roll back. In the meantime, someone finds out where was the broken merge request, roll it back, and then we roll forward. Jarv, do you want to vocalize?
Yeah, I just wanted to cover all the scenarios where we have wanted to roll back. So there are configuration changes to start, which is covered by either Chef or Kubernetes. For Chef, I think there's not like a reason to roll back just because those reverts are fairly done, or they're done quickly and they're managed by Chef runs, which we don't have a pipeline for anyway. For Kate's configuration changes, I think it'd be good to have a rollback option. These would be anything that, any kind of like configuration change that we make outside of auto deploy, including like adding environment variables, changing configuration changes to GitLab.rb, et cetera. And then we have the satellite projects, registry, shell, et cetera. For those, I think it would be good to have a rollback option the same way we have for auto deploy.
Go for it, Scott.
Tying into Jarv's statement about the need for rollbacks for configuration changes, right now, we do suck in some Chef changes into Kubernetes to deploy them, and similar if we do a rollback in Kubernetes related to a configuration change that was spawned from a change that's stored inside of our Chef repository or our Chef secrets, we don't currently have a way to connect those two together. That's usually via someone's memory banks hosting that data inside of their brain internally. We don't have a way to say, hey, this configuration came from Chef. Let's make sure if we revert in Chef that we also repeat this pipeline in the Kubernetes environment as well. I struggle to verbalize that in words.
Cool. Okay, no, I think that's a good point. Are we talking with the, like, what's the kind of, I guess, like scope of rollback people are thinking about? So like, are we thinking that we either might want, or it might be a good idea to have parts of auto deploy rollback separately from like the whole auto deploy? Like, would we want to roll back like just the Kate's deploy, for example?
The scope I'm thinking of is incident mitigation. And when I think of incidents that we've had in the past, there has been a desire to isolate rollback to either fleets or K8s, clusters, even individual zones. So being able to roll back one cluster instead of all three clusters, just so that we can help isolate problems.
Is it worth splitting up this discussion into two parts? One is auto deploy and the other is configuration changes.
In my opinion, those two things goes in, I mean, there's no common development here, right? So when you work on one, you just have to do something and it's completely different what you're going to do in the other hand. So maybe you're right, it's worth splitting the conversation.
Yeah, that we can do that. Like, is the, so in terms of what we are trying to achieve with rollbacks, from like a, I guess from a, maybe from like the OKR perspective, in which I mean like the, what's our kind of direction we want to go in as the team? Like, is there one of those that's more valuable than the other?
When we say outside of auto deploy, I think we need to be specific as to whether we're talking about configuration changes outside of auto deploy or also satellite projects that are deployed outside of auto deploy.
Yeah, but all those satellite projects right now are just a configuration change in Kate's workload. Is it correct?
Yeah, that's true. So I guess if we have a rollback for configuration changes, we get that for free. I would argue though that we also get auto deploy for free in Kate's workloads because they all go through the same pipeline.
Yeah, the thing that so the only thing that scares me here is registry. In terms of there is active development in registry world, and they will soon introduce their database migrations, and this
completely agree. Yeah,
is going to be a problem.
Yeah, agree. I think for
why is that a problem? Just, I mean, like you think that it'll be hard to reason about whether the rollback.
Yeah,
is
I mean, because
safe?
Yeah, that's the point, right? Because I'm also scared of the development process itself, right? So we took years for us to have a framework for developing migrations that was actually mature to do multiple environments at the same time. And yeah, I mean, when I pointed out these things in the I don't remember, the team was just asking how can we deploy. We pointed out things like, how do you plan to do rollbacks? How do you plan to do migrations on multiple environments or environments with multiple versions? And they kind of blank it out. So
I think this is a good argument for targeted rollbacks instead of all or nothing rollbacks, which means if there is an API regression, we have the ability to roll back just the API instead of rolling back.
No, the product would not work this way. It would break everything. I mean that we rolled back the APIs, but then the front-end fleet and Sidekick will run a different version. I'm not really sure for how long we can keep this running.
Why do you say that? Because this is the way that we deploy now. Like, we don't deploy everything at once. We have to support the version, the version n-1.
Yeah, this is correct.
It's timing, right? Like, how do we know that something hasn't moved forwards? Like, suppose that's probably a question for me on rollbacks, is that, like, presumably there's like a window which we can roll back and it has an impact for another period of time. Like, it feels like registry in particular, I would rather avoid, because I think it's a slightly different project. We need to work with package to understand the impact.
I think a difference there to to take into account is that currently we sort of support multiple versions, as in old and new, but it's always moving forward, and it's only 2 versions. If we start supporting rollbacks for, say, individual clusters, you can end up in these cases where, say, frontend and Git run version B, but now suddenly, say, Sidekick is rolled back to version A. In theory, it's kind of the same concept, the direction is different, but I think, or at least I would suspect, our code doesn't handle going back as well as it handles going forward. So as an example, we have to split between regular and post-deployment migrations. But let's say introduce a code change where we're now storing comments in a different format, for example. Moving forward, you can deal with that. You can, generate the new format for old thing. The new format for new comments, and perhaps support the old format for old comments. But then, if you roll back, suddenly your code is now only capable of understanding the old format, whereas some comments might be in the new format. And so, to handle that, you basically have to say, okay, well, we support the old format until version X. But it doesn't really solve the problem, because if you then reach version X and have to revert, you have the same problem. So you basically delay it. And so you end up with these cases where you have to code very defensively, or you actually have to do this sort of three-step process where you add a change. That one, if there's a new format, you can't roll back. You then add another change which sort of stops using the old approach that you might be able to roll back. It ends up just complicating the whole process. Like, nobody's going to do that. Like, even as I say this out loud, I'm already confused by the idea.
This is already in our documentation, is the expand and contract pattern, and engineers are really struggling with it. So yes, but there's also another thing, which is sidekick jobs. When you add a new variables and you tend to default it, then it's forward compatible, but then you cannot roll back.
We need to support this. The application needs to do this. Full stop, right? I mean, we upgrade Sidekick in parallel, unless if we want to start upgrading Sidekick before we upgrade the rest of the front end. This happens now, so the application needs to support it. One recent example of the registry was we deployed to registry, and there was a metric change, and then our AppDex dropped. And in that case, I wouldn't want to have to roll back the entire stack, right? I just want to roll back. I have the registry developer on the incident call. He just wants to roll back to the previous version. I want to click a CI job that does that. I don't want to have to roll back everything. This is why I think that targeted rollbacks for incident mitigation are essential. Like, I think it just comes up over and over in my experience that you want these targeted migrations. You don't want to have to go through an entire pipeline.
Yeah, but this makes sense for registry, which is not part of GitLab code base. So I'm completely in line with you, right?
I think, because I think that's the biggest in the future. What we don't know is the dependency.
So it's still a different component. It will be a version, right? So you can still handle this.
But what about Web API and Sidekick and Giddily, right? Should those all move together, or should there be like, maybe I want to do Web API and Sidekick together and not Giddily as well, right?
I wrote to skip Giddily and rollback. So it's later in my point. Yeah. I said that we should not touch Giddily by default, and it should be an option to eventually roll it back. Because we have the same problem here, that Giddily is usually very backward compatible, but yeah, forward compatibility is it's really hard to get it right. And we are not really stressing enough for this in development. So this will not happen very soon. But then think about this. We're talking about changes that have something like 3, 4, 8 hours of code changes, right? Because we do auto deploy 4 times a day, 3 times a day, and we tend to deploy in every version. So we need to focus on this, because this is the key aspect. It keeps the change really small. And what I'm thinking here is still, if something like this happened, we are an incident. We should not just keep deploying. We have to figure out what is broken, fixing it, and move forward. Because then otherwise we have this nightmare scenario when you have one part of the fleet running version n-2, then you have another part running version n-1, then Sidekick is version n+3, and then you can handle this.
But we would never have n+3. We would only have n-1, right? And this is how we do deployments now.
But only if you say...
I'm just thinking that outside of a post-deployment patch, rolling back is the only way we can fix something quickly.
Agree.
So it's really the best option we have now. I don't think going forward outside of a post-deployment patch, and maybe that's what we do, but outside of that, I think rolling back would be the right thing to do.
But the point is we'd then stop, right? It's still an incident, even though we'd roll back, it's still an
Yeah,
incident,
mhm.
right? We'd pause the pipelines. And I think that has to be true for whatever we're rolling back, because knowing we've rolled back is the challenge, right? And investigating why and things like that. So that makes sense. So if we're saying an end goal is everything can be rolled back, which I think is what we're saying, what makes sense to focus on initially? Like, is it auto deploys as a whole, or is it something else?
I'm still not saying everything should be rolled back. And maybe I'm the only one saying this, but I'm saying that we shouldn't do all or nothing rollback. We should do targeted rollbacks.
Sorry, no, I meant more like our end goal is everything is able to roll back, not necessarily that it's a one-stop thing where you roll back the entire fleet. But yeah, the end goal is that every project can be rolled back. So what makes sense is our kind of first step? Or actually, let me rephrase it. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Maybe as a first step, we target the ability to roll everything back. And then later we could iterate towards the ability to selectively roll back, like Jarva's pushing here.
Yeah, that could work.
What do you mean, Scarbeck, by that? Just so I kind of understand, because we kind of have that ability now by just kicking off a deployer pipeline for the previous SHA, right?
Yes. So I think the process of automating that could be betterized.
But we've never ever done that. Like,
Jarv, this
I don't think
never
it's ever
work.
happened.
GitLab will break everything.
Done staging before.
Yeah, it would be terrible, right? And we've tried to like create rollback pipelines that reverse jobs or reverse order, and I guess my question is like, do we really want to do it? Like, is this? It sounds, in my experience on incidents, it's never really even come up as something we would ever do, just because it takes so long. It's faster to do a post-deployment patch, or even maybe move forward.
This is not true, Jarv. I mean, because you're thinking about a human detecting the problem at the end of a complete deployment and then going back. But if you have these things automated, you can stop earlier. So if you are 10% in the fleet and your updex drops, you can stop and roll back, and it's going to be faster.
Oh, yeah, but in that case, we wouldn't be rolling back everything. We would be rolling back just whatever cluster fleet we're upgrading, right?
Yeah, but if you roll back everything, more than half of the fleet would just be on the right version, so we do nothing.
Yeah, I think I think that's a good part of this, but I also think that it's very rare that our metrics would detect.
You're right.
A problem. I mean, let's be realistic. I think like most of the incidents I've been on that have gotten past a deployment have been stuff that wasn't caught immediately during the deployment. It took a while.
And a lot of people want to spend some time troubleshooting and looking at errors before we decide whether or not we want to roll back. And that also slows us down to kick off a rollback quickly.
Because you have no other opportunities. So what do you have now? Nothing. I mean, you can just try to figure out what's happening and try to detect what is broken part, because there's no rollback option today. No release manager will ever say, let's roll back, because you have to manually check and make sure that there was no post-deployment migration, which is not easy, right? Because it really depends on what you deployed. It's not just the content of the last package, it's the delta between the last two deployments. Then who knows how to roll back a GitLab.com deployment? I don't know. And I'm sure that if I follow this instruction, it will not work. So will you ever propose something like that?
But isn't that what this meeting's about? Like, I think for this, it's like, we know we can't do it, and we're wondering if we should do it. And you're right, the post-deployment migrations is a major problem for us. I don't know. And we don't have a solution for that.
What I was thinking, which I mean, so when you talk about selectively rolling back, you're thinking about, if I'm correct, either part of, so you're kind of splitting the fleet by cluster names and things like that, and services, right? So you want to roll back only registry, or you want to roll back Git fleet or Git fleet in zonal cluster X. You're thinking about this, right, Jarv?
Yeah, basically this Epic 373, which has like a mock-up of, it would just be a manual job next to each fleet or each cluster that would do a Helm rollback or a Ansible rollback.
Yeah. What I'm thinking here is that it's just so when we have deployment and rollback pipeline, there are really straightforward, so that every single job handles something, and you don't have this kind of catch-all do Kubernetes deployment, but you may have triggered this Kubernetes deployment for this cluster or whatever. Then you can selectively run only those jobs that you want, so that you have the ability to roll back everything, and by everything strings attached, because I will not roll back Gitly in any case. I would just, for me, Gitly is a manual step that you can do after if you want, but that's just, I can explain a bit better about this, but the point is that if you can roll back everything, then you can also roll back selectively. If your pipeline is well designed.
I see. So like with the refactored pipeline, there'll be like one trigger, and then we would just have a rollback trigger. But we're still, I think, isn't part of this kind of deciding whether we're going to do something sooner than the refactor or not? I'm not sure.
The refactor is still going on, and part of, I mean, there were some, so for instance, we need to figure out if there are rollback migrations, right? Sorry, post-deployment migration. So this is something that it's easier in the refactored pipeline. So the idea is that some of the most important part of the pipeline refactoring should kind of go from the current OKR to the rollback OKR, so that we have what we need in place.
Yeah, I think this is kind of part of this is about prioritizing those tasks.
So for me, it sounds like the first step that we really need to accomplish is how do you programmatically determine whether post-deploy migrations are going to hold us up from performing a rollback, correct?
No, we just need to know if there are, because if there are, we cannot roll back.
Precisely. So what if we create that method in some way, shape, or form, and maybe when it gets around to time to building a rollback pipeline, perhaps when a deployment pipeline gets created, it's smart enough to know that post-deploy migrations are contained or are not contained inside of there. If they are, don't create the rollback capability in that pipeline.
Well, the story was a bit more involved, which was something like, don't run post-deployment migration if system is unhealthy and there are post-deployment migration, so that you can roll back. Because it's just like having a longer deployment window.
I was going to say, so you're almost proposing like a baking time, like a deployment baking time maybe, or something that gives a window, a rollback window.
Yeah.
I vaguely recall, I can't remember who suggested this, but I remember something similar to a baking time, but in this particular case, it was more along the lines of, we don't run the post-deploy migrations until the next deploy is about to start.
Yeah, but then you have the problem that you may have an incident because of the post-deployment migration, and then you are still.
But that doesn't, I proposed this a while ago. I think there was some resistance to it, but so what if there's an incident after the post-deploy migrations? You would have one anyway, right? Like, why is that?
No, because
I think you would have that either way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you run just before the next deployment, it means that you don't know. So
It's hard to reason about it, right? Like, it's
yeah,
hard to
you
say,
have to reason
okay,
about why, if it's the new code or is the
fair
post-deployment migration. And then there's also another aspect of it, that you need to run migration, the regular one, before the canary deployment.
Correct. Yes. So you would run post-deploy migrations before Canary.
Yeah, exactly.
And but while you're yeah, I mean, I guess I see your point, but I think it still kind of puts us in a better place than we are now, because how often are problems triggered from post-deploy migrations? It doesn't happen very often. And to reason about that, we could always just roll back the application. And then if the problem is still there, then we would say, aha, it's post-deploy migrations. Like, we would just keep on rolling back up until the last post-deploy migration, right? And then we would know.
No, I didn't get this.
Okay, so we do a post-deploy migration, and then we start upgrading Canary, and then we start upgrading the main fleet, and now there's a problem. So was it due to the post-deploy migrations, or was it due to the application upgrade? So we just revert.
So you roll back the canary thing. So that
sure, yeah, you just roll back, like it's up to the last post-deploy migration. I don't think in theory it sounds reasonable, but I don't know if that would ever happen in practice. I do think it would be better than what we have now, though, right? Because then we would always feel like we could just roll back. But yeah.
But it makes it really hard to reason about it, because you are thinking about the next version, but you didn't complete the old version deployment. So you have those two things attached. But I mean, it's just a detail, right? As long as you can detect, either you stop, either you pause, either you run it at the beginning of the next one. See, you need to figure out if there is a post-deployment migration. And this gives you the answer if, can I roll back, yes or no?
Yeah, and I think we landed, last time we talked about this, we landed on batching the post-deploy migrations as being the best option. And
yeah, this was my
idea. That's
idea.
where we left it, and this is where we left it.
So what happened last time is that, so batching post-deployment migration is kind of outside our control, right? So it requires an effort in socializing the idea in development and making sure that we can actually do this. So if we can do our part of the homework so that we actually detect them, know when there are, then it's just a matter of showing, yeah, we were able to roll back in this case, and then you can do, these are all the incidents that we were not able to roll back because of this. And because this tied also to the discussion about completely automating deployment. Because right now we still have the baking time and we click the play button. But if we have more control over this, and knowing that it is a rollbackable migration, rollbackable deployment, then you can just be more easily rolling forward because you can roll back.
Yeah, that makes sense. So so are we saying that we want to, before we even attempt any rollbacks on staging, we definitely want to be able to identify post-deployment migrations and also make sure, like, eliminate Gitly from any of our rollback conversations?
Should we also identify the type of post-deployment migrations we have? Because currently we can have two types, a post-migration that triggers a background migration. And I think in that case, it is not possible to roll back. But there are another types of post-deployment migrations, just like the ones that add indexes or remove indexes. And those are declared inside the post migrations because they are adding indexes to large tables, such as projects or namespaces or CI builds. And then, I mean, in that case, should it be possible to roll back when just adding an index?
What would happen? Are they, they're long running though, right? Aren't they? Like, what would happen if it was partway through?
Do you mean like if it is canceled or?
Like if it had like got halfway through creating the index and yeah, it would stop, right, and begin a rollback, like.
I guess the index is not going to be completed and it will be like partially created. But honestly, the indexes that are added in post migrations are normally used for the tooling that is usage tooling, the one that is only executed every 13 days. So those are indexes that are not truly needed at the moment of the application. So I guess if some of them is not created completely, shouldn't be a big deal. It's just a theory, not a fact. So though.
I think,
yeah, go ahead, Scarborough. Sorry.
Myra, I was going to say that I think your point is very valid, and I would love to see us get to that point, but I think we should iterate towards that goal. I think it'd be easier if we just concentrate on if post-deploy migrations exist, true or false, and operate upon that to start. And then later on, we could figure out what types of post-deploy migrations would interrupt us in specific methods.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Sorry,
Makes sense.
Alessio, for interrupting you.
I was going to say the same exact thing, so thank you for vocalizing the idea.
Cool. So next comment we've got here, Alessio, we need a rollback pipeline. So how do we get to that?
Yeah. So what I was thinking here is that, yeah, we already talked about this. So the current rollback pipeline was designed a long time ago with different deployments in mind. And I think it would be safer to assume that it's not working instead of trying to just fix it and handle it. We said we cannot roll back migrations. So this is, well, we will not run them. But what I was thinking is that if we run the deployment of a previous package, then the migration contained in that package should already be in the database. So just running the deployment job would just do nothing. I'm talking about regular migration, so the one that we do upfront. So it would be kind of a no, and it should be safe. Gitly, in my opinion, we should avoid rolling back Gitly. I was also working on the pipeline refactoring before this call, and in the original attempt to make the rollback pipeline, the rollback deployment is already there. So there's a variable that says if we are rolling back, don't do Gitly deployment. And yeah, this is what I was thinking.
I think that makes sense. So certainly as a first or like first few iterations, I think that feels like it will help us in instance without taking on too much complexity. Do we have elements of the coordinate deployment work that we would need to complete in order to build out a pipeline that would roll back this stuff?
This is a very good question. So my point, what I'm thinking here is that it's probably not worth touching the current GitLab CI YAML because it's kind of huge. So I would rather, because we still have to think about how can we, I mean, we know how to find post-deployment migration. We need to actually code I think we run in Ansible, the Ansible script to detect this. So maybe we should work on this in parallel with refactoring the current deployment pipeline, because it's going to be way more easier because there's so many jobs there right now, and I mean we are just going to remove many of them. On the other hand, I'm thinking as I speak. So what will happen with the pipeline refactoring is just that we are going to collapse jobs together, because right now we have something like this. So we have, think about the web fleet, just as an example, right? Then we have some kind of skeleton of what does it mean to deploy the web fleet. And then we have many jobs for every environment. So we have kind of GSDG web fleets, then we have GPRD CNI web fleet, and then we have GPRD, so all the environments. But they are the same job, except from some variables that are, that detects the stage and the environment, basically. So in the current situation, this information are not detected, but are kind of supplied by this GitLab CI YAML file. So let me try. I hope I will be clear enough. So right now we have one big string that can have several environments with a comma that just split them. And so what we are doing is that we use regular expression to match if there is the environment that we want in that string, and then the scaffold of the job inject stage and the environment. What I'm working right now is doing the opposite. So you can have, because you can have only one, it either have the environment and eventually the canary stage or not. So the same job will just detect the content of it and generate those information. So in theory, we should be able to run the same job, and Ansible will do the right thing because the variables provided are the right one. So in the end, we will move from, I don't know, we have kind of 20 jobs, whatever, environment times to just those 20 jobs. So if we start adding the logic for rolling back, it should just work, because it's still a matter of running. It basically is running a deployment with the previous version and cleverly skipping some jobs, like do not run post-deployment migration, do not run the Gitly deployment. So maybe we can do both things together. I don't know.
So in other words, the way you're seeing it is that we would have the release tools pipeline, and there would be a manual trigger job that would be like a rollback, and that would trigger the Ansible pipeline with rollback equals true, which would then run the appropriate jobs at the previous version. And it kind of stays the same. I guess the deployer pipeline, there's no special logic there because you're just passing in the previous SHA and rollback equal. Maybe you have like one special thing logic for rollback equals true where you skip Gitly or something. But that's it.
And it will also allow us to start thinking about dogfooding the rollback feature in GitLab itself, because I'm quite sure it works more or less the same way. It just runs the same pipeline with the version from the previous deployment and something like rollback equal true. So I would just say, let's make sure that the variable is the right one, so that we are kind of GitLab rollback compatible in a certain way. But yeah, the idea is this one.
So then it would be the case then that API Web, Sidekick, and API Web, Sidekick, Pages would all be treated as a unit. Everything that's upgraded in parallel would be rolled back in parallel. Okay. I'm trying to think how this could work better with the multiple zones, because I do think there is potential to have, like, rolling back a single availability zone would be nice, but that can come later, I guess.
Yeah, one thing I'd love us to think about, Jav, is whether we could blue-green deploy rather than roll back. But we can work about that. Might be a separate challenge.
Yeah, I'm very nervous about this, considering how we all think we're just like getting lucky by, the application working with n-1, But, like, thank God it's been worked, it's worked to date.
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't know.
That's true.
Yeah.
But we have paying customer that wants this no downtime deployment. So it's kind of, we should be doing, right?
Would we, on that proposal, Alessio, where would we start the rollback from? So say we detected a problem in the production deployment, would the rollback begin at staging, or would you just roll back production and then get the others in line, or how would we handle the other environments?
Okay, so I think it was in another discussion, the one about the deploying from master, but I'm not really sure. So there was this concept of always testing rollback on staging, regardless of incident. So if we have this pipeline, but we, let's say, run it once now because we are coding it, then we never run it for 6 months, then we just cross our fingers and hope that it still works when we actually need it in 6 months, 3 months, whatever. So one idea was that in parallel to canary deployment or something like that, we could think about rolling back staging and then rolling forward again. So that with this kind of approach, either we know if rolling back is an option because it actually works, and then when we have an incident, it will make absolutely no sense to start from staging because you have the problem now. So you want to mitigate it as soon as possible. And then you can just drain canary and roll back production. Then you roll back canary if you want, or you can have a canary still available in case you want to do some kind of active debugging on the broken code. It really depends, right? So, because maybe I remember we had an issue of multiple versions at the same time where we were hoping to have some possibility for our developers to actually run this run some tests against canary, but with canary drained, we had, because they were not able to reproduce it locally. But I mean, this is very in the future, but so I was thinking, right, we have an incident, we can start a rollback and drain canary immediately.
So I like the idea about rolling back to staging and then rolling forward, but I do wonder if saying that everything was okay, rolling back in the staging is going to give us a reliable measure, because staging is quite different from production in the traffic and in the database and in the feature flags that are enabled there. So I'm not sure about that one.
It will be as safe as saying that rolling forward in staging was enough to actually deploy it to production. And at least tell us that the pipeline works.
I think another issue we may run into is that staging is often very, very ahead of production. As I've been release manager, I've seen staging be ahead at least 2 to 3 revisions at times by the time production receives the deployment. If we start the procedure at staging, it may be too far ahead for us to use that as a good measurement of whether or not we can roll back production.
And this is why this conversation started in the deployment from master. Now I remember, because we were talking about committing to, if we package something, we should commit to bring it up to production. Yes, you're right. I don't know in the afternoon, Myra, but at least in my morning, I try to keep an eye on this. So what really happens is that because of a bug in our release tool logic, we tend to tag 2 versions every auto deploy branch. So usually we have 1 merge request of difference between what is actually in staging and what is in production. Because for instance, if I have just some minor changes, I don't go for a second production rollout. We just wait for the next auto deploy build. So delta will be one commit, one merge request. But yeah, it's true, right? So is not exactly the same thing.
Is that something, how do we test this? Like, I think we have to get to a stage where we can get staging to be we're happy enough with staging. Like, I think at the moment we use it for a decent bit of our test confidence. Are we confident enough with it to be able to test out rollbacks, or do we need to like actually do more of the ideas we proposed in the deploy from master and actually, you know, keep it a little bit closer to the version we're actually deploying?
Staging has been rolled back recently. The last time I was a release manager, we had an issue in staging that caused us to roll back. It's just a matter of creating the necessary pipeline that we enjoy using. And I think that's the larger conversation that we're having here. The other portion of the conversation is determining whether or not we have post-deploy migrations.
I was also thinking about your point, Scarbeck, is that if we always roll back staging after each deployment, so let's say we wait the QA and then we start the canary rollout, and as soon as canary is rolling out, we roll back staging. So this, well, it's not exactly, no, it's still not the same, because that's the problem, right? We keep thinking about packages, but we never think about delta. So what we, so canary, yeah. So canary and staging will get every single package, but production usually skips one or two. So that's, yeah, this, yeah, we will not solve this one. But I mean, we are moving from not having this in as an option to actually having rollback. So I don't know. I mean, it's sometimes seems like we are trying to really solve problems that are really far away, and we still know nothing about the process. And so I think that there are several steps we could do and start iterating on it, so that then we will know better and figure out if we actually have to change something else.
I think Alessio raises an interesting point. Because we skip revisions in production, we really need to figure out if a post-deploy migration is going to halt us. And I think we need to leverage what we use for our release tracking feature to use that as a gauge, because we could create like a chat ops command that says, can I roll back? And it just knows what's currently on production, maybe what's being deployed to production versus what was previously on production, because we can't just compare the last SHA that was on Canary, because that might be a revision that never made it to production, for example. I don't know if that's going to be the hardest part of this, but I think that's probably where we want to start. That way we could build our own confidence level in making sure that our pipelines do what we want them to do, and have that we're testing the right procedures and such.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, what do we need to do to actually try this out?
I would like to see a chat ops command where I ask it, can we do a rollback? Give it a environment name, and chat ops knows what to look for and will give me a yes or no.
Do we know all the things we'd need to check for?
Our release tracker has the history, and we should be able to check what current pipelines are running to determine if something's going out now or if there's nothing going out, and we should be able to determine which version is going out if there's an ongoing production or deployment.
I was looking into this in issue 1061. There is a script, actually it's a one-line plus grep that tells you if you can or cannot. What I think, but I'm not sure because I'm not entirely confident in this part of the deployment. But what I'm thinking here is that if you can have a pipeline that connects to the deployment box that runs migration, running this basically is GitLab Rails DB migrate status egrep something down. Yeah. So it tells you if there are migration in the current version of GitLab installed on that box that are not present in the database. So if you have this thing, so these things will tell you if by the end of the ongoing pipeline, you will have post-deployment migration. But it will not tell you after you have run them. So let's say that the deployment is completed. Once it's done, it's done. And so if you have problems after running the post-deployment migration, then you need to store this information somewhere. So that's why instead of working on this idea of chat-ops, we started kind of a bit earlier, which was kind of let's figure out if there are post-deployment migration and acting within the pipeline, so that you know this right before running post-deployment migration. Because we need a place to store this information. And at the moment, we don't have any kind of storage or database for release tools.
What's the smallest thing? Like, how do we actually, like, Myra, I know you've done it to me a load of times, but like, how do you actually determine there are post-deployment migrations in a deployment?
Not in a very fancy way, honestly. I normally check the SHA from the packages and fetch the difference. And then I compare the difference in the UI and search for a db/post-migrate.
So what we could do here is we have this metadata project on the ops instance where we track versions and branches and stuff like that. When we generate the tag for the auto deploy deployment, if we can somehow determine what the previous tag is, we can generate a div through the API and then just find, hey, are there any files, I guess, added or changed in DB post migrate? And then we just list those files in the JSON that we store in this metadata repository. And that way later with tooling, we could just go to that repository, fetch the JSON, get the list of migrations. And that way you wouldn't just know, oh, there are migrations. You will also immediately see what the files are. I think the challenge there is that when we create a auto deploy tag, I think it's just difficult to figure out what the previous one is because our versions aren't necessarily monotonically increasing. Parts of them are, but the SHAs, for example, are quite different. And so I think you end up with this logic where you fetch, I'm guessing, all the tags that match a certain pattern, let's say the usual pattern and then the year. And then of those remaining tags, you have to figure out, okay, sort them by day, month, hour, minute, whatever, and get the latest one. As I say that now, the alternative is when we record our deployments, we know what the current SHA is that we deploy. We know what the previous SHA is, because there we do store it in a more easily accessible manner. And so we could record it then. The problem is that we then record that data after the deploy, not before it. Whether that's a problem or not, I don't know. Sorry?
Let's record it. Let's record it when we begin a deployment, and it'll have some state that says deploying, some present tense, and then we could record it a second time afterwards. So we'll have the data beforehand, and then we should also have the data after it as well.
Right, but so there the difficulty is if we, but put it this way, in the release tool side of things, there's really 2 points where we can hook in. This is when we tag these auto deploy tags, which is essentially at the start of a deploy. But at that point, figuring out what the previous deploy is more difficult. On the other hand, we can do it when the deploy basically finishes its stage, so staging, canary, production, etc. Because then it will run a release tools job that will create the deployment data for that. And at that point, we know what we are deploying and what we deployed before quite easily. Like we actually already have the data. So I think hooking in there will be, from a coding perspective, easier. And I think from a release manager perspective, it wouldn't necessarily be worse. As in, I can't think of a case where you want to know before you do a deploy, actually as it is deploying, but before it actually updates host, you want to know that it has post-deployment migrations. Usually, especially in the context of a rollback, you want to know that after a deploy. As in, let's say if I'm release manager this week, I don't care if a deploy has post-deployment migrations until something is wrong in it, until you need to act upon it, rollback, whatever it is.
Yes, but we are long-term. We have this long-term project of actually running the deployment in automated way, which means that you must know it upfront. Otherwise, you shouldn't start the deployment.
And so long-term, of course, we can change. And I think long-term, this release tools code will change quite dramatically. As we move to Kubernetes, for example, we hopefully at some point stop deploying this big package. And then this entire tooling needs to change anyway, because right now it assumes that we deploy this big fat package and we sort of yank the SHA out of this big version identifier. So at that point, when we do that, then yes, you generate this diff before a deploy, store it, and then you can do things like, oh, we changed this file. Are you sure you want to deploy automatically? Things like that. But I think for now, probably it's easiest to hook into the deploy tracking that we already have, and then just store a list of migration files for later review. And yeah, then we need a separate tooling that somehow takes that data and presents it in ChatOps or whatever it is.
I mean, maybe it's implementation detail, but so it feels like first step would be release managers are able to determine post-deployment migrations, right? Like we need to have a way we can confidently do that.
As in write down a procedure for this, because even if you fully automate this, it might break, might not work. So it's nice knowing what to do manually.
Yeah.
And then the next step is record those migrations automatically. And then the third step will be some tool that presents the data.
Yeah, that makes sense. It would be great to be able to test this out on staging. Does that feel like something which would be a useful step to actually, I know Scabet, you did do a rollback a few months ago. Would that be a good way for us to actually start building up confidence and finding some of the edge cases of things? Is actually to identify a deployment that didn't have post-deployment migrations and roll that back on staging and see what happens? Only if we'd learned stuff, of course.
I would hope so.
In any case, I would like to, I don't really believe that looking at Git diff is the right option. It's just the only one that we have now and is the worst one. Because oftentimes, especially on staging, we may have things that got reverted or things like that. So the content, that's why I was stressing out that it's not about the content of the package, but it's about the status of the database. And that's the reason why when I was investigating this, I was trying to figure out a way to actually ask the database about this, because it's the only real true answer that you can have. Because oftentimes we may have migrations that are just skipped or they are just removed after, or they got messed up. But after running, so the idea was this one, that when you promote a production build, so when you promote a production build, you already had the regular migration because we do them on canary. So the only migration that are missing at that point in time are post-deployment migration. And they may be from different packages. They may even be because that current package has no migration, but the previous one had, and we skipped that package on production.
I think in that case, what you can do, because we track the finished migrations in the database, like a simple table that you can query. And what you would essentially do is fetch all those versions and fetch all the files on disk in the post-migrate and basically get the diff of that. The downside for that is you need database access and you need, I think you need root access on the server because of the user permissions, or would actually need the appropriate user account that can access the source code on the server. The challenge now becomes that we need some sort of program running on these hosts. With Ansible, for example, that's doable. Yeah, essentially, whether it's grep, how you do it doesn't matter, but you need to somehow run it on the host. With the Ansible approach, I think that works because we already essentially SSH in and run the commands. I'm not sure how well this would work if we do Kubernetes because the deployment approach is very different there. And what you could do there is, as part of the deployment, the host, as it deploys itself, runs some command and then, sends this data somewhere. The problem you get then is if you do that for 20 hosts, you get the data 20 times because they don't know which ones is sort of the leader in that sense. So I'm not really sure how we would implement this appropriately given the state that we are in, but also the state that we want to move towards when it comes to deployments.
This is something we discussed with distribution when we say when moving forward to a full Kubernetes world, we want to have hooks into the deployment process so that we can code our rolling back and rolling forward strategies. So that's exactly that type of things, right? Because you want to be able to run a pod with certain script or whatever after or right before, right after migrations and things like that. So, I mean, it's as soon as we know how to do it, it's just a matter of making sure that we can port this over to Kubernetes. And even if we don't, we can still run migrations outside of Kubernetes because we will still ship packages to our customers. So I think that moving away from the machine that controls the deployment, the migrations manually will be very far away in the future. I don't know, Jarv, what do you think about this? But I mean, it seems very far away to me.
I think we're going to have migrations done outside of the Kubernetes cluster. I'm not sure how that's going to work. And I see us having, the 4 clusters and us being able to, at least for the front end, we'll just do all or nothing rollbacks for each cluster because with auto scaling, I mean, we do this now where we completely drain a cluster and then the other clusters are able to take on the extra load. So this doesn't work with Sidekick currently because it runs in the regional, and I don't think we're going to be splitting Sidekick. But at least for the front end, Web API, and Git, I see that just like we'll probably just do full cluster rollbacks, and we'll drain clusters even if we need to.
Cool. Okay, that makes sense. So a few other bits on the agenda. Myra, do you want to just mention the note you added about the blueprint? Because I think it's definitely an interesting one.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. So there is a blueprint that is being developed by the database team about testing database changes in a production-like environment. And the idea is to test the migration, whether it's a regular DB or background migration. I don't think this has like a direct impact in this subject, but it could make like the migrations more reliable and trustworthy that they are now.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. And this is the kind of the other thing that actually is interesting about rollbacks is that, I mean, hopefully these will help us sort of go back and work with development on how to make code changes and migrations safer so that we don't need to be rolling back stuff. So yeah, that's a good one, I think, for everyone to know about so we can help people use that as well. So we've got about 20 minutes left. How do we want to take this forwards? So I think to be kind of clear, like this OKR will pick up on where we're up to with coordinate deployments. So it's not a case that we need to shut all that work down and immediately begin rolling back on Monday. One should feed into the other. But are there things that we either want to prioritize or test out or like investigate further to kind of help move this forwards?
I think maybe the first thing we need to tackle is programmatically determining whether or not it's safe to perform the rollback in the first place. So we need to figure out, have post-deploy migrations been run? Do they exist in the database? Is that a blocker for us? And then we could determine how we could make this better in our pipelines. I guess we could do that in parallel, but we still need that prior to us performing any tests at all, right?
Cool. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then also alongside that, or as part of that, let's also figure out the pieces of the coordinate deployments work that will help either the sort of early stage of rollback or the next stuff. Like I'm kind of thinking if there's anything around, if there's any tech debt that would make sense to have paid down, or if there's anything around like notifications. I suppose that's the other interesting thing about rollbacks is keeping track of what has deployed or not deployed or partially deployed. And then we can sort of load that stuff on the early part of the quarter.
I think another item we may, unless I've not been paying very close enough attention to this meeting, is maybe decide how to do the rollback. Because I think Jarv and Alessio have two, not necessarily competing methods, but they're not compatible methods of performing a rollback procedure. And I just want to make sure that we've got a sane user experience nailed down that we agree upon and, that works. Both are plausible suggestions. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page as to how we're going to move forward with what that's going to look like.
Are those idea, mine and Jarv, really different? It's kind of doing as subset or doing as a whole, as long as you can still do the both thing, is still the same, say the same process. The only thing that we kind of excluded is everything that is not. So no, let me rephrase. So there could be configuration changes and rolling out a registry, for instance, or Git shell is configuration changes right now because it is a configuration in Kate's workload. And this, I think we say that it are part of what we want to do, but are kind of outside of the scope of the early part, because we already have this, right? We just, you can revert the change and roll and deploy again, unless I misunderstood.
My preference here would be to focus on Alessio's proposal for the deployer pipeline, and then in parallel add rollback manual jobs to the Gates workloads pipeline, which will allow us to revert, which is basically it's just a manual job that sits next to the upgrade job that will do a Helm rollback. And this, I think, is important for the configuration changes. And also we could use it for application changes that are treated like configuration changes, like registry. I think it's a pretty simple thing to do anyway. It's not going to take a long time to make that pipeline change. What do you guys think of that?
I agree.
So do you mean that every single job in Kate's workload has a manual job next to him to undo the what he did?
Yeah,
and
just
then
another stage.
But then you have this misalignment between the what's committed in the repository, okay, and what is actually running, right? So the next one will kind of erase.
Yeah, it would. And what would happen is if we auto deployed after that, it would fail because we do this diff check to see if there are any unexpected changes, and it fails the dry run. And so we would have to wait until someone made a new MR with, either we would do a proper revert and revert the change so that it's clean, or we would move forward. But it would at least allow us to roll back quickly a cluster if we needed to.
What exactly will fail? Will fail the Kubernetes trigger, or it's earlier
actually,
in the deployer?
Not the trigger. Well, the trigger will fail, but what actually fails is the downstream job that does the diff, because when we do the diff, we also take a look to see is the set of changes consistent with an image-only update? And in this case, we would see other things that are pending, and it would just fail.
Okay. So this will result in having half of the fleet upgraded and just Kubernetes failing because it was lagging behind.
Yeah, but I think
it would not prevent the rest of the fleet to be upgraded.
But I think, it wouldn't prevent the rest of the fleet. It would just prevent the Kubernetes. But this is good because otherwise we would revert the change, and then the next auto deploy would just like apply it back because, right, because like you said, what's on the Git repository isn't consistent with the cluster. So I think it's a good thing.
Well, I kind of imagine that we still have a production incident issue open if something like that happens. So
yeah, for sure.
I kind of imagine that we would never reach that point because we already stopped before. But yeah.
Oh, okay, that sounds good. And then one other piece, which I'm sort of thinking about, which I'll put on the OKR issue most likely, is how we link this to something measurable. So Marion suggested mean time to resolution, which makes sense from this being an incident related thing. That's not a number that's being tracked at the moment. And obviously it's also a number that when we start tracking it will be hugely impacted by lots and lots of other things. So I'm going to have a think about how we could actually measure the types of incidents that we want to be able to roll back on, like whether we are tracking those as the ones that have got a root cause as code change or something like, or deployment related, or something that focuses it in a little bit so that we can actually link it back to rollbacks. Cool. So in terms of next steps, do we want to catch up again like next week? We should definitely catch up again next week because I'd like to talk through what the OKR looks like in terms of a kind of scoped out OKR, because it will be beginning of Q1. So let's do that and have a think about whether there's kind of follow-up conversations that we need to have, or like whether if we have some issues we could review, for example. But it would be, I think it'd be a good idea to keep these two aspects of rollbacks in a kind of one conversation so that we actually are, I want to make sure that when anyone's a release manager, you're all comfortable with here are rollback options, and it's not like Kubernetes rollbacks being totally separate from code rollbacks. So let's, even if they're two different solutions, let's also discuss both of them. Cool. Is there anything else anyone wants to either discuss today or propose for kind of a next step? Nope. Fantastic. Okay. So I'll set up something for next week. I'll probably just put an hour. So hopefully we'll be starting to wade through some of the uncertainty as we go. And we can check in on where we're up to and work out some next steps. Cool. All right. Speak to you all soon. Take care. Bye.